Good evening, everyone. Happy Thanatology Thursday and happy almost Halloween. So, as most of you probably know, Halloween here in the United States is this Saturday, October 31st. And I thought, what better way to celebrate Thanatology Thursday than to talk about Halloween and the origins of Halloween and some of the ancient death traditions that are associated with Halloween. So, many of you probably celebrate Halloween the same way I do, the same way I have since I was a child, by carving jack-o'-lanterns and going trick-or-treating and getting dressed up and even doing things like bobbing for apples. And all of those things actually have their roots in some ancient traditions and practices. So today I wanted to talk to you all about the ancient pagan Celtic festival of Samhain. So Samhain dates all the way back to the Bronze Age, to before the modern era, before even the medieval times. So back before Christianity arrived in what is now Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Great Britain, and even the part of northwestern France that we call Brittany, these areas were populated by people called Celts, and the Celts had their own traditional spiritual and religious practices, which we now call paganism. The word pagan itself derives from Latin, the Latin word, I'm sorry, I might butcher this, paganus, which was a sort of derogatory term to mean farmer, rural person, and sort of has the same association as the word hick now. And when Christianity later arrived in the Celtic lands, which we'll talk about a little bit later, Christians used the word pagan to describe any of these people who practiced their traditional rituals and rites, and obviously they were banned from being practiced. Pagans are still around, and modern day pagans have reclaimed the term pagan to describe themselves, and they prefer to be known as people of the earth. And their spiritual practices revolve around nature and what they call the wheel of the year. And that really puts into perspective how they honor the changing of the seasons, planting, growth, and harvest. You get the picture. So the wheel of the year. And Samhain, as we're going to talk about, is the quote-unquote last spoke on the wheel of the year. Back in these ancient pagan Celtic times, Samhain was actually, I should say, November, the first of November, was considered the beginning of the new year, because the harvest was over and winter was coming, and the earth was about to go into hibernation for what they called the dark half of the year. So Samhain is actually the ancient Gaelic word in some of these communities for November. And so they celebrated their new year at this time. Now, this ritual was very important to pagan people because they were pastoral people. They were farmers. They lived and died by the seasons, the harvest, how much they could reap from the earth. So the end of that harvest time was really a time for reflection, because at that time the harvest was over. They had to take stock of what they had reaped in that harvest season, as well as the animals that they had, which animals they thought could make it through, and which they would have to say goodbye to in order to feed their families through the winter. And just like the animals, many of these humans knew that they would not make it through the dark time of the year because, as we all know, back in this time of humanity, there were no modern hospitals, there were no antibiotics, so really, and really just the weather and the cold and sickness could mean saying goodbye to a lot of their families and people that they loved. However, even though these pagans were going into the dark time of the year, knowing that it was going to be a really hard couple of months, Samhain was not considered a scary time for pagans, because pagans really don't fear death. Instead, they respect it, because death is a part of the circle of life. And I think the reason that Samhain and now Halloween have associations with scary, spooky, fright sort of themes is because it is considered the time of the year where the veil between the living world and the spiritual world is at its thinnest. So pagans believed that this time of the year, these couple of days surrounding the festival of Samhain, were a time where their ancestors and beloved dead could breach that barrier between the two worlds and mingle with the living. So instead of being a scary time, it was a time to look forward to, almost catching up with your ancestors and your beloved dead and honoring them. And so they celebrated this in many ways, but a big one was by making a home altar. And the home altar was decorated usually with flowers, candles, little things to remember their ancestors by. Obviously not photographs because they didn't have them back then, but maybe little tokens of remembrance. And then, of course, treats for the spiritual visitors. It was also celebrated by lighting bonfires, decorating graves, and, of course, by sharing memories and stories of the ancestors. And as I said, and so actually I wanted to show you all here the beginnings of my Samhain altar. Here I have a couple of my beloved dead remembered on here right now. I will be adding as I go through and try to find the appropriate photographs. I have candles lit. I have some flowers, and I have incense burning, which is copal incense, which is traditionally supposed to be evocative of memory and honoring the dead. So to go back to the pagans, as I said, they consider themselves people of the earth because they honor and respect all parts of nature and the cycle of life. So just like Samhain is the last spoke on the wheel of the year, death is the last rite of passage that all humans will experience. And regardless of our feelings, nature will keep cycling, and death is a way for the world to make room for new life. So pagans believed, and I personally believe, that death is to be honored, respected, and that our dead are to be venerated. And for this reason, pagans have carved out Samhain as a time to venerate death and remember their ancestors, and particularly to grieve, because as we have discussed many times, grief is a thing that will find us all, and it's a healthy thing to do, to grieve. And grief can be lifelong, and it'll come in many forms. And so I think it is quite beautiful that pagans carve out time to grieve and to remember. So back to our original topic. How did Halloween as we know it come to be? Well, in the early part of the Middle Ages, around the 5th century AD, Christianity had spread throughout the Celtic lands. And as I said, that includes modern-day Ireland, Scotland, all of the UK really, and northwestern France in the region of Brittany. And nowadays we think of these areas as being very Catholic. But before Catholicism came to these lands, they were traditional pagan practitioners. So even after many of the people who lived in these Celtic areas converted to Christianity, either by choice or by force, they continued to practice many of their pagan rituals and rites alongside their Catholic Christian faith traditions. So in response, the Catholic Church, co-opted a lot of these celebrations and turned them into Catholic holidays, and tried to reframe them as Christian rituals. So there were just some unsuccessful attempts, but then around the 9th century AD, Pope Gregory III dedicated November 1st as All Saints' Day, a day to honor all of the Catholic saints and to remember them. And in the Catholic Church's holy day, it is a holy day of obligation, meaning it is a day that Catholics are expected to go to a mass or a church service. It's a day to honor the hallowed saints of the Catholic Church. And that is a word that is especially important because Samhain, the celebration of Samhain, which traditionally began at sundown on October 31st and ended on November 1st, became rebranded by the Catholic Church as All Hallows Eve, the night before the celebration of the hallowed saints. So over time, that terminology of All Hallows Eve morphed into Halloween. So this allowed Catholic Celts to continue to celebrate their ancient rituals and of honoring the dead, while not falling out of favor with their Catholic Church. As I said, many of our time-honored Halloween traditions have their roots in the stories and practices of Samhain. For instance, Samhain was a time where those who celebrated it would dress up in costume to trick the fairies and the other sort of the people that were crossing the veil that they didn't want to see, and hopefully by dressing up and disguising themselves, those unwanted spiritual visitors would miss them. It was also a sort of bacchanalian time, to borrow a word from another faith tradition, of drinking and feasting and bonfires, and it would go on for several days. And so I believe that this is one of the ways that we get trick-or-treating. But all that aside, this is a Thanatology blog, so I want to bring us back around to the theme of death and dying. And I want to encourage you that, especially in this weird year where we're really not going to be able to go to costume parties and see all of our little trick-or-treaters and interact one-on-one with each other. That to use this Halloween, if it fits within your faith tradition and within your spiritual practices, to remember your beloved dead. We all have them. So I would encourage you to explore different ways that you can do that. Maybe it's as simple as taking this time to visit the cemetery and visit the grave sites of those you've lost. Maybe you can create a small home altar like I have, with different things to remember and to honor your loved ones. Maybe it's even as simple as sitting down with your family and going through some old photo albums and talking about the people that have gone before. There are many different ways that you can celebrate this season. And again, as I said, in this weird year where things don't look as they usually do, maybe it's a good time to spend time saying hello to your ancestors and your memories of them. So, with that, good Samhain to you. Happy Halloween. And I'll see you for my next installment of Thanatology Thursday. Bye.